Come along as we go back to the White House and visit with our 26th president, Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt unexpectedly became the 26th president of the United States in September of 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley. Young and physically robust, he brought new energy to the White House and won a second term on his own merits in 1904. Roosevelt, a Republican, confronted the bigger struggle between management and labor head on and became known as the Great Trust Buster for his strenuous efforts to break up industrial combinations under the Sherman Antitrust Act. He was also dedicated conservationist, setting aside some 200 million acres for national forest reserves and wildlife refuges during his presidency. With the national forests and reserves and wildlife refuges, there's one. If you go back to my adventure vlogs, I forget which one it was, but it was one of my adventure vlogs. When my brother and I went to the Lehigh Valley Zoo and the Trexler Game Preserve back in August. And when we went to Hickory Run State Park and Weiser Lake, and not the Conrad Weiser Homestead, but those vlogs, they are actually national forests and reserves for the wildlife. In the foreign policy arena, Roosevelt won a Nobel Peace Prize for his negotiations to end the Russo-Japanese War and spearheaded the beginning of construction on the Panama Canal. After leaving the White House and going on a safari in Africa, he returned to politics in 1912, mounting a failed run for president at the head of the new Progressive Party. Now, I actually want to go on a safari. However, like most places that you would want to travel here in the U.S. even, is expensive. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27th, 1858, to Theodore Roosevelt Sr. and Martha Bullock Roosevelt, a wealthy family in New York City. Known as TD, spelled Teedie, later Teddy, he was frail and sickly as a boy, and as a teenager following a program of gymnastics and weightlifting to build up his strength. Upon graduating from Harvard College in 1880, Roosevelt married Alice Hathaway Lee and entered Columbia University Law School, though he dropped out after only 1 year and entered public service. He was elected to the New York State Assembly at the age of 23 and served 2 terms from 1882 to 1884. Both his wife and mother died on the same day in 1884, and the grieving Roosevelt spent the next 2 years on a ranch he owned in the Badlands of the Dakota Territory, where he hunted big game, drove cattle, and worked as a frontier sheriff. Upon returning to New York, he married his childhood sweetheart, Edith Kermit Caro. The couple would raise 6 children together, including Roosevelt's daughter from his first marriage, Alice. Edith and Theodore's other children were Theodore Roosevelt Jr., Kermit Roosevelt, Quentin Roosevelt, Ethel Roosevelt Derby, and Archibald Roosevelt. Did you know? Early in his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt sparked a scandal when he invited the African-American educator Booker T. Washington to dine with him and his family. He was the first president ever to entertain a black man in the White House. In 1886, Roosevelt ran unsuccessfully for mayor of New York City. 2 years later, President Benjamin Harrison awarded Roosevelt's service to the Republican Party with a job on the U.S. Civil Service Commission. He was reappointed by Harrison's successor, Grover Cleveland. In 1895, Roosevelt became president of New York City Board of Police Commissioners. And in 1897, William McKinley named him as Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy. Upon the outbreak of the Spanish-American War in 1898, Roosevelt left his post as Naval Secretary to become colonel of the colonel of the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, known as the Rough Riders. Once in Cuba, Roosevelt led the Rough Riders in a brave, costly uphill charge in the Battle of San Juan. He returned home as one of the war's most visible heroes. But his complex legacy, including not just his achievements as a progressive reformer and conservationist who regulated big business and established the national park system, like many of his time, he also believed firmly in the existence of radical hierarchy taught by those of white Anglo-Saxon descent, a belief that shaped his attitudes and policies on race relations, land rights, and American imperialism. The Republican political machine in New York threw their considerable support behind the returning war hero, hoping Roosevelt defeat a popular Democrat candidate to win the governorship. Once elected, Roosevelt displayed his characteristic independence and unwillingness to buckle to the pressure of party bosses. In 1900, the leading New York Republican, Thomas C. Platt, conspired with the National Party boss, Mark Hanna, to get Roosevelt named as McKinley's running mate in order to keep him from running for a second term in the governor's office. Roosevelt campaigned vigorously for McKinley, traveling by train for more than 21,000 miles to speak in 24 states. And McKinley and Roosevelt won in a landslide over Democrats William Jennings Bryan and Adlai E. Stevenson. On September 6, 1901, a deranged anarchist named Leon Chazaux shot McKinley at the Pan American Express in Buffalo, New York. McKinley died 8 days later, and Roosevelt was sworn in as the 26th president, only 42 years old when he took office. He was the youngest president in the nation's history, and his youth and vigor immediately transformed the public image of the presidency. From the time of his first annual message to Congress in December of 1901, Roosevelt expressed the progressive belief that government should mediate between conflicting forces, including capital and labor isolationism and expansionism and conservation and development in order to stabilize American society. Roosevelt's Square Deal domestic program included a promise to battle large industrial combinations or trusts which threatened to restrain trade. In 1902, his government brought a successful suit under the previously ineffective Sherman Antitrust Act against the Northern Secretaries Company, a railroad combination formed by James J. Hill, E. H. Herman, and J. P. Morgan. That same year, he intervened in the prolonged coal strike in Pennsylvania, using a combination of negotiation tactics to halt the strike and gain a modest pay increase for the miners. Roosevelt also used his extensive power to further his passion for conservationism. In June of 1902, National Reclamation Act, dedicated to large-scale irrigation projects in the American West, became the first major legislative achievement in his presidency. In addition, Roosevelt set aside almost 200 million acres, almost 5 times as much land as all his predecessors combined, for the national forest, reserves, and wildlife refuges. As a part of that process, he favored the removal of many Native Americans from their ancestral territories, including approximately 86 million acres of tribal land transformed for the national forest system. Despite his progressivism and his reputation as a trustbuster, Roosevelt was able to enlist the support of more conservative Republicans and business interests and win a landslide victory over Democrats in 1904. He was the first president to win re-election after gaining the White House due to the death of his predecessor. And with that, I will see you all in the next one.